divisions of the American Psychological Association, as well as a frequent speaker at conferences and where I've met him, and in the media as well. We've got some of his books at Caversham's outside in the lobby here. Existential Humanistic Therapy, Existential Integrative Psychotherapy, Awakening to Awe, The Polarized Mind, and this is his most recent, this is a 2016 book, Supervision Essentials for Existential Humanistic Therapy. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Kirk Schneider.
Thank you, Dan. I hope you all can hear me. Okay? Well, first, I'm deeply appreciative to Paul and Lillian and the INPM for hosting me today, and I'm delighted to see you all to talk about a topic that obviously is near and dear to my heart, and I imagine several of you as well. I thought that image might be helpful as a kind of touchstone during a part of the talk here, just to give you a little photographic sensibility of awe, perhaps. I guess I'd like to have you immerse in it a bit, if you know what I mean. Just let it speak to you in its own way. So there's no doubt that there has been a very exciting development in the field of professional psychology and science, and that is around the resurgence of the sense of awe. It's very interesting how this suddenly came together, both from sort of the depth researcher side. I'll name myself on that side, along with a few others like Mark Stern, who has recently passed, a close mentor of mine. But also on the quantitative experimental side, with the work of Keltner and Haight. And some of you may be familiar with their now classic article called Approaching Awe, a Moral, Spiritual, and Aesthetic Emotion. That was done in 2003. And they've been extrapolating on that initial article ever since. Now, there's a couple of things that might be of note about this resurging interest in awe. One is that thus far, the sense of awe has actually been found to be more salient than the feeling of happiness. So that's a kind of intriguing finding, I think, given that happiness has been so much of an obsession within our ranks, especially in positive psychology. And it's also intriguing because the sense of awe is a more complex emotion, I would say, because it does include some rather unsettling feelings along with the exuberance, if you will. Whereas happiness perhaps could be seen as a more one-dimensional sensibility. So I don't know if you've been keeping up with the Huffington Post and other social media outlets, but there's been a virtual explosion of interest in this topic. And that's kind of curious to me too. You know, what brought that together? How did that gel? Perhaps people are finding in their search for meaning that we're wanting to engage a dimension of human experience that seems to have more of a richness and a depth than sort of the satisfaction of needs, if you will, or some simple idea of contentment, although obviously those have their place in our lives. So first let me elaborate a little bit more on the quantitative research on the sense of awe coming out of Keltner and Haight. So basically, Keltner and Haight define the sense of awe as an experience of, or a sense of vastness that cannot be assimilated and yet can be accommodated. So if you're thinking about those old Piagetian distinctions between assimilation and accommodation, assimilation has to do with being able to fit something into our own schemas, if you want to speak cognitively. The sense of vastness that cannot be assimilated, that cannot be grokked, in a sense, cannot be wrapped around, is an interesting definition of awe. It's not the sort of original definition, but I think for their purposes, for experimental purposes, for purposes of a certain languaging, it's a quite elegant way of stating it. But the twist here is that it may not be assimilated, that vastness, but it can be accommodated. In other words, we can somehow adapt to it. We can't wrap our minds around it, our beings around it, but we can adapt to it. So, as you might begin to see, Keltner and Haight were attempting to come up with a kind of biologically, evolutionarily based concept of awe. And they see the sense of awe as potentially associated with a number of things. Perhaps first and foremost, adaptation. They think that it was a way for early peoples, and even people now, to find some degree of comfort and belongingness and camaraderie around things they didn't understand, like great storms or earthquakes or large events in people's lives that otherwise would terrify them. It's a way that people could come together and feel a little less thrown off by it. Notice that that awe combines, in a sense, the awful and the awesome, right? So again, not a one-way dimension. They also found that the sense of awe is associated with everything from generosity to increased willingness to volunteer, to greater patience, to an expanded sense of time that we get sometimes with mindfulness meditation. It's actually associated with the desire to embark on more substantive travel destinations. It's kind of interesting. So one study showed that when people were primed for awe, they chose to go to some historically rich site or to study at a certain place, certain region of the world, rather than just a resort kind of thing. It's also associated, at least in the short run, with increased life satisfaction. As to what these things mean, actually, I think that will take further unpacking. What do we mean by life satisfaction? But obviously a positive direction for people. And finally, it's been, I find this particularly bemusing in a way. The sense of awe, being primed for the sense of awe, is associated with more frequent piloerections. Now, how many of you know what piloerections are? Well, okay, a few of you do. You're quite scientifically sophisticated, or biologically sophisticated. I learned more about it through a recent conference that Keltner put on at UC Berkeley, which I'll talk about later. But basically a piloerection are goosebumps. And this seems to be a fairly universal finding about cross-culturally. It's associated with more goosebumps. But I prefer to stick with the word piloerections because I think it's in some ways more in keeping with what these guys are pursuing through their inquiry into awe. It's also associated with decreased cytokines, and again, we need biologically oriented researchers to define that for us here. But as I understand it, cytokines are chemicals in the body that are associated with inflammation. So the sense of awe, again, being primed for the sense of awe, that's very important, primed for the sense of awe, is associated with decreased inflammation markers in the body. And therefore, by implication, a greater sense of health, perhaps well-being. Now, while I think these findings are tremendously important, especially on the level of basic adaptation to life, perhaps a basic sense of well-being, I also think that they're limited in certain ways by a language that I find to be a little distancing, especially when we're talking about a sensibility as powerful and as intensive and arguably sacred as a sense of awe. So I want to give you a little juxtaposition here of research on this topic. So whereas they focused in on a sense of awe as vastness that can't be assimilated but can be accommodated, I attempted to do research, qualitative, in-depth research, with people who had experienced a sense of awe as they understood it, as pivotal to their life transformation. People ranging from ex-drug addicts to ex-gang members to people with severe mental disorder in their family setting. One woman had a schizophrenic mother. To elderly people, to people suffering great maladies, physical illnesses. And we tried to come up with a language that was more experience near, if you will. I think this is an important qualifier in looking at awe. So we have one that's a little bit more externally oriented, and the other that's trying to get to more the inner world of the sense of awe. So at the end of that study, the interviews which are in my book, Awakening to Awe, Personal Stories of Profound Transformation, I came up with several categories that seem to summarize what these people were experiencing, and I call them the lenses of awe. So what people experienced were, for example, one lens of awe. It's like picking up a pair of lenses and being able to kind of shift one's sense of the world to experience the passing nature of time and life. Experience the passing nature of time and life. They're able to kind of click in to that mode at certain important points of their life and as a part of their experience of awe. Another was to experience the sense of surprise. In wonder at the world, to discovery of some kind, even in the most ostensibly bland situation, like a gathering that you expect to go the same way it always has, and it's always been boring, and you never really had much of a, in-depth conversation or feeling, these people were able to open to the possibility that something might happen, something different might happen, and that they could actually make it happen. Maybe they approach somebody that they have a routine conversation with in a very different way. So it's opening to that. Also, another lens of awe was appreciating the vast context behind and beyond any given situation. So, for example, here we're in a building that's anchored to a floor, that's anchored to a ball that's whirling around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour, that's nested in a galaxy that is hurtling through the universe at 1.2 million miles per hour, that is going to a destination that's completely unknown. And how many times do we think about that? Do we feel that with our breakfast or whatever? Or even in temples or churches. Well, these subjects, these participants, were indicating that that kind of cosmic sensibility, cosmic consciousness, can be a very powerful part of living one's day-to-day life. To recognize that one is a part of this vast context. That one is both apart from, in a way, and very small, but also very much a part of something much greater. Another lens was the lens of intricacy and subtlety. Noticing subtle ways that they were feeling, that others were feeling or expressing themselves, kind of tuning in to the almost infinite variety of aspects of the world. I think of these with memories often. You get into a memory, you know, maybe something you smell in a garden reminds you of a great morning, you know, when you were embracing the day, you know, playing a sport or anticipating going to an amusement park or whatever. I don't know. And memories like that, tactile memories, can open more and more intricate associations. And finally, last two, the lens of emotional, or lens of sentiment, being able to be deeply moved in a situation, being able to open oneself to be deeply moved. It means a vulnerability, an exposure of oneself at a whole-bodied emotional level, if you will. And finally, the lens of solitude, capacity to be alone. Now notice how with a number of these things, they're kind of going against the grain of where our world is going. I think that's of note, where so many things are, you know, moving so quickly, and we're tethered to our machines so readily. We're tethered to others through our machine. How many times do we take that time to step out on our own without any handheld devices or earbuds or whatever? Be with ourselves. Unfortunately, too often that only happens in kind of formal retreats or special settings. Could happen every day, as these folks were conveying in the book. I think what the qualitative depth studies also showed was that the specter of death, of loss, of sorrow, of fear, of disarray. I know Mick was talking earlier about disorientation. and contrasting it with orientation, which is more on the meaning-based side. The meaningless-based side has disorientation, kind of chaotic, being at sea. But actually, isn't disorientation and lack of structure an opening as well as a potential closing or disabling of the person? Just something to think about. Being in disarray, coming to terms with disarray in some way. Helplessness, a sense of helplessness is also in the background of these in-depth inquiries into awe. And finally, as an overarching notion, our vulnerability as human beings. And this seems to be a rapidly jeopardized quality of human experience. And in fact, it seems to me if there's any quality of human experience that is most threatened as we move toward a high-tech robotic age, it is this sense of vulnerability. Because that is exactly what much of our synthesizing and our mechanizing is attempting to displace. If you really think about it. It doesn't have to go that way, but a little caution flag about what are the implications of it. So the more I've been dwelling on this notion of sense of awe, the more I'm realizing that there are kind of two senses of awe. There's probably many more, but two that are emerging in the contemporary world. And the one is the Keltner and Haight, what I would call the quick boil sense of awe after Japanese folklore. In Japanese folklore, there's the notion that one's personality can exhibit the quick boil or the slow simmer. A nice cooking metaphor. So there's the quick boil sense of awe that is a lot about, sensational, thrilling, whizzing, whirling gizmos and kind of jarring perceptions of the world. And they're sort of captured by a video by Jason Silva. Has anybody seen Jason Silva's videos? You might look him up, okay, a few. He's readily available on YouTube. And Jason was at this conference that I went to, the first Art and Science of Awe at UC Berkeley in June. You might take a look at it. It's kind of interesting. But Jason Silva showed in shorts, and they're all about like exploding galaxies, whizzing comets, all kinds of colorful arrays in outer space, and it's like it is a bit of a hypomanic flight through the most intense experiences you could have within 2 minutes. That's a lot of what the conference had in tone. There was a singer, entertainer there, and it had some quality of the TED Talk or a revival meeting, if you will. And I think a lot of this has to do with priming. The question of priming also seems to me to go along with the quick boil form of art. Priming, as you know, is a standard of experimental quantitative research. It's a way of controlling for, I guess, the independent variable. Right? So you want to give people, you want to make sure that they get the sense of awe. So what does priming usually consist of? Consists of scenes of nature, waves great waterfalls or a great mountain, or maybe one of these Jason Silva videos. And so that's the kind of thing they've used to show then changes, or to look at changes in people once they've experienced these. And indeed, it does appear that a number of those changes are positive, as I mentioned before. But how positive? How lasting? What is the quality of those changes? There were very few mentions of death, seems to be, in that symposium. Very few mentions of sorrow and loss as a part of the experience of awe, sensibility of awe. Very little about anxiety. This is something that my mentor Rollo May would continue to emphasize, how significant, how integral that dimension of anxiety is to a fuller life. Now, that is one point of view. I share it. You have to soul search that one out for yourself. But classic literature is not really mentioned. There was some poetry, but in classic, Western literature, from Cervantes' Quixote to Goethe's Faust, to Dante's Inferno, Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich, the death of Ivan Ilyich, and I'd say even Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby. I mean, these works bring out a sense of awe about living, or imply the value of awesomeness in living. But not just through little scenes or separate scenes or one scene, two scenes, but through kind of a lifetime of struggle. Whether that's a struggle to, envisage a new world, a new life, as in Don Quixote, or a struggle to experience more of the wonder of life rather than the materialism and wealth which you get in Gadsby. There's the of awe as a place to get to. If you get to awe, then you can have, more frequent piloerections or decreased inflammation markers in the body. But is that really how we want to conceive a sense of awe, that you do this, it'll do that for you? Maybe on one level, yes. That can be very helpful. But what about the sense of awe being a lifetime cultivation? What about the sense of awe being a byproduct of a life well lived, if you will? And being an attitude toward living, and not just a particular goal or result. A capacity to experience humility and wonder, or sense toward living. That's my own definition coming out of the studies. Awe is a sense of humility and wonder, or sense of adventure toward living. And that is available at any moment, right now. It's here. If we could but peel away the layers of our conditioning that keep us from sensing it, that keep us from connecting with the bigger picture of living. And a recognition that we're part of something incredible, much faster, much beyond what we can conceive. And I don't care if it's randomized elements. Just still really turned on by that. The fact that I'm a part of all that. So I don't use God necessarily, but I certainly do have I guess you would say a faith, a trust in the amazement, the awesomeness of the inscrutable. Now at this Berkeley symposium, they were actually saying in a few years we'll be prescribing awe. Prescribing awe. Now here you're really bringing that medicalization directly into the field. Well, how are you going to prescribe awe? Well, you'll send kids to an awe camp. They'll be able to experience awesome things. What's that?
Say awe.
Say awe, yeah. Aw shucks. You'll give apps. Yeah, you're using I'm sure in the Adirondacks you'll see awe, but what I fear is that it's going to get into a dosage thing, a dose-response kind of situation. So we're going to have to titrate the degree of awe that we're going to prescribe, for the person. And of course, who's coming up with those prescriptions? Well, they're based on findings, so they're good for aggregates, but maybe not for a particular individual. Anyway, it raises some interesting questions. Not sure how much time I have here to get into all of this, but one of the things that concerns me here is that we're moving more and more, even with the sense of awe, but I think in psychology as a whole, moving more and more into a commodifying practice and profession. And we're doing that in great part, understandably, because that is the socioeconomic model that we're living under. And the socioeconomic model pretty much dictates the emphasis on efficiency, on speed, on instant results, and on appearance and packaging. Or another way to put this is the machine-mediated model for living. And so instead of raising questions about how that technicization is going to be shaping our psyches and proposing critiques or challenges to those ways we're being shaped, it seems like a lot of our profession is moving toward simply acquiescing to it. And understandably, again, I do have a great deal of empathy for it because this is where the money is. This is where the great government funding is. It's where the great corporate funding is. It's not particularly about that other side of awe, the anxiety-provoking sense of awe, certainly the vulnerable, delicate, humbling sense of awe, the unknowing, the disorienting element of awe. So I see those two problems, or see the one problem as this emphasis on the quick boil form of awe, as distinct from the slow simmer, or one is cultivating it as a lifetime project. And again, these don't have to be opposed, they can be side by side. But I fear that we're giving much less shrift to the slow simmer for reasons I mentioned before. But also, the conventional research, mainly quantitative experimental research on awe, lacks a critique of how, especially the slow simmer sense of awe, is being suppressed systematically in our culture and in many cultures throughout the world. There's nothing about a critique of awe in the culture, or I should say awe deprivation, awe depletion. And in fact, I fear that one of the very things that they're trying to get away from in supporting people to experience more of a sense of awe which is, about living a more full and satisfying life, they're actually undermining by turning it into a more commodifiable type of experience, a more means ends, instrumental kind of experience. And the more we do that, folks, I fear the more we end up potentially losing this extremely unique, intimate sensibility of our humanness, of the human condition. And the closer we move toward performing things rather than living them. And I think there's a parallel in this with psychotherapy research too, which I won't go into now, but the whole problem of the field is moving more and more toward common factors and the relational aspects of therapy being very important, empathy, alliance, and so on. But how are those engaged in therapy? Are they performed or are they lived? Okay, I see I have very little time, 14 minutes. And you might, just thinking of film also, those of you who are familiar with Tarkovsky, the Russian director, people are. Lars von Trier has done some fascinating work recently. He's a Dutch filmmaker. And certainly Bergman, Ingmar Bergman, has done some wonderful film showing, I think, the slow boil, slow simmer form of awe in their works. The whole focus on the mystery of being and the whole-bodied uplift by being able to experience that, but it's not just an uplift, it's more of an ability to experience the larger picture of life and the fuller ranges of one's thoughts, feelings, sensations, intuitions, historical rooting, which some would argue, and I would argue, or contend, allows for a more enriching, fulfilling life to be able to be in touch with those fuller ranges. But there's not a lot of money in there. As my comedy club owning cousin put it, your problem in existentialism is there ain't no money in anxiety. And he didn't mean the eradication of anxiety, he meant the facing of anxiety. Extremely important. So I think it's important to bring in the dimension of presence as a core aspect of the development of the sense of awe. The capacity to hold and illuminate that which is palpably significant within yourself and between yourself and others. The capacity to be fully there in experience. But the problem is that opens up a lot of potential fears, like the groundlessness of existence. And I have the sense that the groundlessness of existence is in many ways at the core of this thing that the management theorists talk about, that I was talking about before, as integral to the sense of awe. But it's also integral to people living as far away from the sense of awe in its fuller sense as possible. And so there's something about how presence can come to terms with or find grounding within groundlessness that we attempt to cultivate in existential depth psychotherapy. Now, since I guess I have only about 10 minutes left, I was going to show you a video where I attempted to apply these awe-based presencing principles, existential humanistic principles, to a very relevant problem in our times, and that is an encounter between an African-American activist and a Caucasian police officer. And my sense is that we need many more of these kinds of facilitated encounters, at least at this stage, to help people not just talk at each other or report to each other, but actually be able to pause and experience one another. And so I developed this format that I call the Experiential Democracy Project. You can look into it on YouTube and Google, etc. And it is a way of helping people to really meet each other, more of an I-thou kind of connection, where they're both affirming themselves and attempting to meet the other. And so we'll show at least part of the film right now and then follow up with a comment. This is I should say this is the last stage. Before we show it, the last phase of the encounter, the first phase involved turn-taking between the two, which many find very helpful in couples work, and giving each person a chance to really hear the other's story, and then reflect back what they hear, and the other can correct them if needed. So they both did that, and then the second phase was processing what came up, and the final phase was, is there any common ground that was attained here? Okay, and this is where we are now, with the common ground. So we want to go to about 48 minutes. Are we at 48 minutes? Starting at 48. I think we're still trying to move it back. Yeah, there you go. Well, is that 48? This is good, but we need the sound a little higher.
doesn't ameliorate the inner fear. And if I could read this, it's only like 2 minutes, and I read this. This is the poem that I wrote in reference to community police. Entitled What I Fear. What I fear. Are you so afraid of me? Are you so afraid of my skin so brown? You use all possible means to keep me down. Are you so afraid you have to lock me up, keep me shackled, kick my butt? I'm not afraid of you. Let me make that clear. Your baseless fear of me is what I fear. Are you so afraid that I look suspicious, that like a rabid dog, you attack so vicious? Getting autographs while at the gun show, while your victim marked absent, another no-show. Another black teen, sleep in the mortuary. No remorse, your conscience clean, evil mortuary. I'm not afraid of you. Let me make that clear. Your baseless fear of me is what I fear. Are you so afraid of the way I talk? You will kill me dead for the way I walk. Are you so afraid that I'll take your power when I simply want to bloom like any other flower? By George, I pray, remove this fear before another murder, a mother's graveside tear. I'm not afraid of you. Let me make that clear. Your baseless fear of me is what I fear.
Thoughts, feelings, express in this basis for the event common ground, the suggestion what about the
well, I think the common ground that I heard is still so big to me is that these experiences can be that on the one hand, everything in that poem is an experience of based on experience as understood. For me to hear that poem with the second person pronoun you feels pretentious. It's a little bit difficult for me to hear you read me that with the relationship with another. And so I have to sort of take that feeling of the vision that we have and sort of, okay, this is a home, this is based on not necessarily a person. But it does go to speak to what I think we also share in common, and that is objectification. I feel objectified all of the time. Sometimes people are over-appreciated. One buy coffee, one do this kind of thing. Like, you know what, I just want to do my job. When I know I don't have to have to say thank you so much for your service and it's all meant well. We just want to do our job. But we're going to do it for doing our job. Other than that might be a positive idea. That might be a positive for people. That's great. There's also these negative. There's a negative in us there too. That negative in us is potentially not by acting or activists. It's like every single police officer that commits crimes against the system. I think the people do agree on it, there's not personally very
Why don't we cut it here? We're going to cut it here. I'll just make one last remark. Okay. You just mute it, please. Thank you. Okay, so very quickly, both parties felt that this kind of dialogue, which took place for about an hour, would be extraordinarily helpful to the community, to police recruits, in particular, the police officer told me. And I want to hone in on the facts of what was happening there between them. The process, not just the content. That what we have in that situation, in that very supported, held situation, was a coming to terms with radical otherness, because both of these people represented radical otherness to each other. And I think it helped to have a mediator, a facilitator there to hold that container for them, to be able to contact each other in those ways. And that opened up a quite rich discussion of not only what separates them, but where they potentially could come together. And just lastly, I feel very strongly that we need an equivalent of a public works program for depth existential psychology. And for this kind of facilitation, I think we need an army of depth facilitators, to just like our physical army, to go out and help to facilitate these kinds of encounters with people, because these are things that many of us clinicians know something about and can help with, I believe. We see some pretty horrifying and contradictory situations in our work, in our encounters. And this is, I think, a really crucial way to apply our skills and trade. And lastly, I'll call for a depth psychologist general, just like a surgeon general. Why the hell not? There's no more urgent time than now. Thank you very much.